Sorry, go ahead.
Hi, can I ask everyone to please take a seat so we can begin?
Folks, we're going to start with a salute to the flag, please, so we get started. Pledge allegiance
To the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
First of all, I'd like to welcome all of you to this meeting of the Yaphank Taxpayers and Civic Association. It's our annual Meet the Candidates Night, and tonight we're very blessed to have our own congressman here, Congressman Zeldin, and his opponent will be coming at 8 o'clock. We would like, can you hear me? Okay. Our guests deserve your respect. And when you present them with a question after they have presented their credentials and their positions on different items, we would like to be sure that you respect every rule we've ever had here, because it's a great honor for us to have Lee here with us. And we'd like to be sure that your questions are relative to federal issues, things that Lee does, not town issues, not other things, but specifically for federal issues that impact our community. So with that, I'd like to introduce our Congressman, Lee Zeldin.
Well, good evening, everybody, and thanks for coming out. It's great to be with all of you here. I live not too far away. I grew up kindergarten through 12th grade in Shirley, William Floyd School District. I want to tell you a little bit about myself. I went to college and law school up in Albany, where I did Army ROTC. Was then on active duty for 4 years, stationed at Fort Huachuca, Arizona, and then Fort Bragg, North Carolina. I went from active duty to the reserves. I've been serving in the reserves for about 9 years, where I currently serve with the rank of major. I was elected to the New York State Senate in 2010, representing this district, the 3rd Senate District. I would say I don't miss Albany. I miss some people up in Albany, but there are some really important issues facing our country. And when you're up in Albany and you're fighting for a repeal of the saltwater fishing license fee on behalf of the tens of thousands of fishermen on Long Island, that's something to be really passionate about, that we all care very deeply about. But then you go down to Congress and you're at a House Foreign Affairs Committee hearing, and you have Secretary Kerry sitting right in front of you, and you're asking questions and engaging with regards to the Iran nuclear deal, and you find a passion that is exponentially deeper and stronger with some of the issues that are facing our country right now. That's why all of you being here tonight is so important. I was elected to Congress in 2014. Before my time, during my 4 years up in Albany in the state Senate, when I was first elected and I was knocking on doors, I was making calls. I knocked on over 12,000 doors during that campaign. One of my pet peeves is when someone asks for my support and they say, if you elect me, I will do this, this, and that, and then you elect them. And then they come back to you 2 years or 4 years later, giving you every excuse under the sun as to why they got nothing done that they said that they were going to do. But they say, give me another 2 years or 4 years, and maybe I'll get it all done next time. It's one of my biggest frustrations. You know, the most popular job in the United States of America is the American soldier, polls with an approval rating of higher than 90%. The least popular job in the United States of America is the American politician that polls with an approval rating of less than 10%. So you could say serving in the reserves and in Congress that I have the most popular job and the least popular job, or the best or worst, depending on how you want to look at it or characterize it. But it really is a privilege. But I didn't want to come back to the voters in 2012 being that person who is answering as to why I didn't get done what I said I was going to get done. When I ran in 2010, I was knocking on those 12,000 doors. I said I will do everything in my power to fight to repeal the MTA payroll tax, to do something about our property taxes, to help our veterans with post-traumatic stress disorder. During my first term in the state Senate, I got rid of the MTA payroll tax for 80% of employers. We eliminated the saltwater fishing license fee. That was another one. Created the PFC Joseph Dwyer program for our veterans with post-traumatic stress disorder. I've lost more friends due to suicide related to PTSD than I have lost friends overseas in combat. I wrote the law to protect our military families from protests at military burials. We enacted the nation's strongest property tax cap. And I ran for Congress in 2014, and when you first get down to Congress, they give you one of these pins. It's your member ID. Your seniority number goes on the back of your pin. So there's 435 members of the House, and just to give you an idea of just how powerful your congressman is, the number on the back of my pin is 434. So 434 out of 435. Brian Zicke from Montana is 435, by the way. I would make a Navy joke, but tomorrow is the Navy's birthday, so happy birthday, Navy. And I'll let Ryan and the Navy joke off the hook right now. When I got to Congress, I joined. I have 3 committees, 7 subcommittees, over 30 caucuses. There's a lot to keep us busy. I serve on the Foreign Affairs Committee, the Veterans Affairs Committee, and the Transportation Infrastructure Committee. Foreign Affairs has jurisdiction over the State Department. So many issues around the globe, from the debate over the Iran nuclear deal, what to do about refugee policy, a lot as it relates to the fight against ISIS and other terror threats here, movement of terrorists and visa programs. A lot of that is under the jurisdiction of the Foreign Affairs Committee. The Veterans Affairs Committee, something that's fascinating about our home county, and a lot of people who live here don't even realize this. Suffolk County not only has the highest veterans population of any county in the state, we have the second highest veterans population of any county in the country. Suffolk County. A lot of people living in Suffolk don't even realize that. And we love our veterans. We love our veterans, our first responders. We're here where a lot of people volunteer a whole lot of time away from family to keep us safe. And we serve on the Veterans Affairs Committee with some really important issues facing our veterans. Maybe we'll get an opportunity to talk about that tonight. It's up to you with the questions that you have to ask. And the Transportation Infrastructure Committee is a committee that has jurisdiction over the Army Corps of Engineers, over the FAA, roads, pipelines, bridges. There's a lot that is under the jurisdiction of the Transportation Infrastructure Committee. So during my first term, I have tried to secure victories wherever possible, and working with colleagues on both sides of the aisle. I've gotten 3 veterans bills passed. I got 2 proposals to save Plum Island. My counterterrorism screening bill passed the House. My Common Core opt-out bill was signed into law. My Safe Bridges Act was signed into law as part of a 5-year fully funded highway bill. Right here, the Hospital Road Bridge, which is badly in need of being redone, is now getting $26 million, which is 80% federally funded. That is a result of the Safe Bridges Act. It's that formula that's bringing the money here for the Hospital Road Bridge construction. I got a legislative proposal passed to prevent the FAA from taking negative action against East Hampton for the enactment of aircraft noise restrictions. Also legislation to open up the waters. You have to manage the fishery, but opening up the waters to striped bass fishing off the coast of Montauk. These were all passed. And by the way, working with colleagues on both sides of the aisle to get this stuff done. We got a new East End healthcare clinic open in Manorville for our veterans on the East End. My office has helped over 4,000, we've successfully resolved over 4,000 constituent cases, so I have a great team. A few of them are here. It's nice when I show up somewhere and someone shakes your hand and say thank you for helping with their issue, and it was someone on our team who just did a lot of great work. And you just take great pride on trying to help people with the little things too. But there are a lot of big challenges that are facing our country right now. And you all have passions. If we went around this room and said, what's the most important issue to you? We're not going to all get the same exact answer. I have focused on what I call my New Year of American Strength agenda, and it's to protect America's security at home and abroad. National security is very important to me. I believe that we should be strengthening our relationships with our friends, treating our enemies as our enemies, understanding that they do not respect weakness, they only respect strength. Our military should never be sent into harm's way unless they're sent to win. And when they come back home, our veterans should be treated with the dignity, love, and respect they deserve on behalf of a very grateful nation. A lot of these issues related to keeping you safe, keeping our community and our country safe are deeply important to me, but there are a bunch of others too. So the agenda is also focused on policies to help grow our economy, create more good-paying private sector jobs, fighting for our veterans and first responders, improving infrastructure, the quality of education, healthcare, safeguarding our environment, just to name a few. November 8th is coming up soon, and I'm sure no matter who you're going to vote for Congress or anything else, I'm sure everyone's looking forward to November 9th. And we're able to move forward because there's a time for government and a time for politics. I would say that the first week of November may not be the best week to be negotiating a budget, but maybe when you are done with an election, that everyone really needs to work together to find common ground on really important issues. So right now there are campaigns going on, and all across the country this is democracy at its finest, where people are gathered together, and if someone wants your vote, there's no better way for them to show up in person and ask for it. And for all of you who are here, regardless of whether you are here in support of me or support of my opponent or you're undecided, thank you for participating. And thank you for the privilege to be able to serve you during this past term in Congress. It is a privilege. I don't take it for granted. I'm deeply honored and I'm humbled by the experience. And I look forward to answering any questions you all have. Thanks again for having me. Thanks for being here.
Yeah, if nobody's coming up, so I'll count it a bit. I'll stand for this question. Yeah, I got pretty good. Should Hillary Clinton be elected to President of the United States? Legal, law-abiding gun owners, millions and millions of them throughout this nation, are going to be facing an onslaught of attacks. What are your views on this, particularly obviously the Second Amendment, but also particularly the opposition of Hillary Clinton and executive orders and how, in her own words, she's coming after the Second Amendment, she's coming after legal gun owners. This is a huge issue. I know we have many of them, but obviously the Constitution is a big one.
Well, it's a great question. It's an important one. A lot of people don't realize that as we are running these campaigns with regards to the legislative branch, and you're picking a president to run the executive branch, that you also have control of the judicial branch, the United States Supreme Court at play. A lot of the judicial decisions of the United States Supreme Court end up dictating lower court decisions, as well as legislatively and with the executive branch, how the Constitution is interpreted. So there are some people who are passionate about this issue who, they see the Supreme Court decision in D.C. versus Heller, and they say that you can't ban a common classification of firearms that are commonly used by law-abiding citizens, and that Supreme Court decision ends up having huge ramifications in the way the Constitution is interpreted. So you're not only picking a president of the United States, but you're also choosing what direction you want the Supreme Court to go as it relates to interpreting the Second Amendment. It's important that, whenever a state or local jurisdiction is trying to pass, legislate with regards to this topic, one of the biggest flaws is that those who are legislating are not sitting down with people, even those who disagree, in how to vet out and how to have good policy. I saw it firsthand when I was upstate with regards to the SAFE Act. By the way, great name, right? SAFE Act. The thing is that when you pass a piece of legislation and you're saying we need to get this done tonight, because tomorrow morning there's going to be a press conference in DC and the vice president is rolling out the president and vice president's policy, so we have to get this done right now. And then you end up with no vetting, jamming through a bill with a message of this, a quote, message of necessity. What that means up in Albany is that there's no 3-day waiting period. The bill exists like from the moment it hits your desk. They put the bill on your desk and they'll call a vote on the bill like right away. That's not how to legislate. And unfortunately the way that the SAFE Act was written has a lot of different flaws in it. And you talk to people who say that we should ban quote-unquote assault rifles, and you ask them what do you believe the definition of an assault rifle is, and you get all different kinds of definitions, because they don't really know. They were looking for the victory, they were looking for the notch on their belt, and they also know that when something horrible happens, like what happened in Newtown, historically, if you want to get a piece of legislation passed, you want to do it within the first 30 days when emotion is at its highest. Just historically, that's part of the strategy of trying to get something passed. Emotion is the highest right after one of these incidents. And so they were rushing to get this done, and it was deeply unfortunate, because now you take a rifle and by adding a thumb grip to it, you're saying now it's an assault rifle and it has to be banned. Or just you take a rifle and because you add a flash suppressor or a muzzle compressor or a collapsible buttstock or a pistol grip, by adding one feature, you're now saying it is an assault rifle and you should ban it. And unfortunately, if there was more vetting, the proposal, even by talking to people you disagree with, would have been smarter than what was passed. Another example is that they said that if you are at home, imagine this, you are a woman, it's 3 o'clock in the morning, you have 2 kids, 3 kids in your house, and you have chosen to protect yourself with a firearm, because that's your right to defend yourself and your property, and you have a 10-round magazine. The SAFE Act says that you can't load more than 7 rounds in it. If you are an armed intruder coming into that person's house, you're not going to only load 7 rounds into your magazine because the law says that you can only put 7 rounds into your magazine. So one of the things that, and I echo the point with regards to 2 specifics with regards to the SAFE Act, because to your question, what deeply concerns me is that there are people who, for sound bites, for political wins, because they really want to win elections, they'll say things that are sound bites, and you substantively aren't ending up with good policy or well-vetted policy, because people aren't talking to others that they disagree with in order to enact good policy. One last thing, while we're on the topic, because it's related. If any of you go home and you turn on the TV and you look at the attack ads that are against me, you'll see it says that I voted 25 times against Pete King's bill, that I voted 25 times against preventing terrorists from purchasing firearms. First off, I don't know a single member of Congress in favor of terrorists being able to purchase firearms. None. Secondly, is if you actually, I'm asking you to, on your own, type in those bill numbers that you see on your TV screen. Type those bill numbers into your computer, and you'll realize that none of those bills have absolutely anything at all to do with guns. None. So, one example is HRES 809. It's one of the 25 that are listed on your TV screen. HRES 809. How many of you are concerned about the heroin opioid abuse crisis that's plaguing Long Island? Suffolk County has been ground zero of what is an epidemic all across our country. Priority number 1 of those who want to combat the heroin opioid abuse epidemic was to pass the Comprehensive Addiction and Recovery Act. So on a bipartisan basis, I held multiple press conferences here in the district, working on getting additional bipartisan co-sponsors. I joined a bipartisan group to combat the heroin opioid abuse crisis. This was priority number 1. So I voted to consider this legislation, to bring this bill to the floor. And that's one of the bills. By me voting to bring that bill up for a vote, now who would have thought that months later I would be getting attacked on TV, getting this close to an election, where you'd say that that was a vote in favor of terrorists being able to purchase firearms. Just think how crazy it is. By the way, I'm asking you to look it up yourself. HRES 809, or any of the other 24 bills that have absolutely nothing at all to do with guns. There was nothing in the bill, when you look it up, there's nothing ever been in that bill in the past. No part of this entire process did these bills have absolutely anything to do with guns, and that's unfortunate. So my point is this. We disagree on a lot of, there are a lot of topics where there might be controversy, there might be disagreement. This election will be over, we all wake up November 9th and we move on. And I hope if there's one important lesson that we learn from these elections is that it's really important to put aside selfish sound bites for political gains and instead focus on facts. If you can't win an election based on facts, you shouldn't be running. If you can't get elected being yourself, then you should never run for office. If being yourself is not good enough to win votes from people, then you should find something else to do. Yes, please, you're the president.
Our community has received the Brookhaven Rail Terminal at exit 66. Many of the people in this room went and spoke at the hearings and were not in favor of it, but it's a federal facility governed by the federal government, so we really have no say. Subsequent to them being here, anything we've asked them to do in the community to buffer their facility and to landscape it so it's not such an eyesore when people go off the expressway at exit 66, they fail to do all the time they've been there. Consequently, we now have a multitude of trucks, more than we've ever had, even though it's supposed to reduce truck traffic. Well, it's made Yaphank a truck depot. And the roads getting on and off the expressway, the service roads, I don't know if they're considered federal, going to the expressway. The roads are beyond unbelievable. There's huge potholes, it's dangerous, and we have no say on what can happen with BRT. We know.
Wish they told us that too when they came.
Yeah,
We're here as a courtesy is what they said to us.
yeah, we don't have to be here, we don't have to discuss this, and we don't have to vote. We'll do what we want to do. Is there any way through your office that we can try to get some type of decent communication and working relationship with these people?
Please, I would ask you for it. They are, so I mentioned I serve on the House Transportation Infrastructure Committee, and obviously representing this area as well, there's a couple of bites at the apple. I have one staffer, I don't know, Kevin here? So Kevin Dowling is actually based in my DC office, but he's from here. But he lives down in DC, and he's our staff on the Transportation Infrastructure Committee. So all things related to T&I have been going, through him running point. So they, I mean, a lot of, during our first term, a lot of the issues were more local and state. There's a town board process in place. New York State DEC needs to sign off on some of what they're requesting. If there's anything in the future that you want a line of communication with them, whenever we call, they answer.
Does the railroad, Federal Railroad Administration fall under that committee?
Yes. Yeah, I'm actually on the railroad subcommittee.
Okay, because we know that they're planning to expand BRT to the area to the east with the additional property they bought, and they're going to be right up against the farm, which is a National Register site and does wonderful things for the community in Suffolk County and probably most of Long Island. And we feel it's really dangerous. They left a 75-foot buffer, which is nothing, between that and where the children are and the animals and whatever. And they just feel like they can do whatever they want, and we have no say whatsoever.
Yeah, I would encourage you to work with me and my office. Kevin specifically runs point for us on this, but call me. You're the president.
Okay. Danny?
Yes, welcome, Lee. Welcome to our town. My question, you can guess, is going to be about education. Long Island schools, okay, if you were to put them up against, make Long Island a state, and you know this information, and put it up against the rest of the states in the country, we'd be in the top 3 or 5. Our schools are that good, okay? The last thing we need is to be mandated or told to do certain things by Washington. You know, the last time I checked the Constitution, that was something that was kind of reserved for the states, and it seems over the years, Washington has eroded some of that authority, and it's horrible when you get a mandate that comes down and they attach a small amount of money to it, and if you don't do it, which it may not necessarily be the best thing for us, if we don't do it, we're not going to get the money, and we look like schmucks to the community. So I'd like, you know, the general question of, and I'm not going to get into the Common Core stuff, that's a whole other course, but, you know, the general idea of the role of the federal government and education as it relates to the states, and what are your feelings on that philosophy?
Well, back in 2001, when No Child Left Behind was passed, there was an increase in federally mandated testing in our schools. We went from testing once per grade span in English language arts and math to now testing every single grade. I don't believe that that was the right answer. I co-sponsor a bill to roll back federally mandated testing to pre-No Child Left Behind levels. It is a bill that has a few dozen co-sponsors, bipartisan, probably about equally split, if I had to guess, between Republicans and Democrats. There isn't enough support for it yet. However, during the 114th Congress, there have been co-sponsors signing up along the way. The bill's sponsor is Chris Gibson, congressman from state, who's actually retiring. That is one bill I would absolutely love to pick up from him as he leaves, to be able to introduce that particular piece of legislation. So a lot about our education gets mixed in together in like one analysis. We have curriculum, testing, and standards. If I was to oversimplify it, maybe put into 3 categories. And we have standards that are being implemented all across the entire country. You have tests created by the state, curriculum set by the local school district, and there's a really bad lack of communication between all different levels. And we not only have teachers teaching to the test, in many cases they're teaching to the wrong test, because instead of providing 300% of sample questions, they might be providing teachers with 25%. I believe in Long Island schools. I went through Long Island schools. My daughters go to the same school I went to. My mother's a retired teacher from Farmingdale. My father's mother is a retired teacher from Plainview. Father's father was a teacher as well. And I went through State University in New York, up in Albany. I believe that we have some of the greatest schools, to your point, in the entire country. But what happened was we ended up using our kids as guinea pigs over the course of the last few years, where you teach them in one particular model, and then you automatically switch them and test them in a completely different model that they're not prepared for. A lot of the material is not age appropriate. If you go to the domain for English language arts, early world civilizations for 6-year-olds, the Age New York website, the New York State website for the implementation of the standards, we are teaching as a standard about ancient world Mesopotamia and the strategic advantage of the Tigris and Euphrates River with regards to the development of the city of Babylon. These are standards for 6-year-olds, first graders. English language arts, early world civilization, that's the domain that we have right now in New York State. The other thing that I have an issue with is that my daughters went through early intervention. They were born 14 and a half weeks early. We've been blessed that they caught up to their peers, but it wasn't easy. For some of our children growing up with disabilities, if you are a 10-year-old, you are a 5th grader, but you are reading at a 2nd grade reading level, to be testing that student as if they are a 10-year-old, as if they're a 5th grade, knowing, everyone knows that that student is going to fail. It's going to be a miserable experience for that student, and they are going to bomb terribly. And we're still teaching them. So all these are different flaws. A lot of them are related to mandates that come from the federal, and in many cases from Albany as well. There are cases where Albany will put mandates on a local school district, where if the state wasn't even putting the requirement on the school district knows how to shine. When I was a state senator, I introduced legislation to stop the implementation of Common Core. I happen to be opposed to it. I believe in challenging our students, testing our students. I don't believe Common Core is the answer. But when I had introduced this bill, the biggest threat that was used against this bill was that we would lose out on hundreds of millions, if not billions, of federal funds. Yes. So when I got to Washington, D.C., I introduced legislation to say that a school district can, that a state can opt out of Common Core without penalty from the federal government. And we got that legislation passed and signed into law. So now any state, New York included, can opt out of Common Core, and that threat, the biggest threat that's used against that effort to pull out of Common Core, the biggest threat is now gone. The federal government cannot penalize financially New York State. So I have a lot of different issues and passions. We could probably have an entire meeting just on education. Something very close to, I'm sure, everyone's heart in here. And thanks for raising the point.
Okay, yes. I'll move to the presidential side now, all right? Of late, I mean, there's been a very contentious election going on between Hillary and Donald Trump, all right, since he was the nominee. Last week, that whole thing came out with the tape. I heard on the radio that there was like 88 senators and congressmen that split with him, okay, that are stepping away from him. What is your position? Are you staying with him, or are you splitting with him?
Well, I'm not going to defend a lot of what I've seen, really on both sides, with the presidential race as it relates to Trump and Hillary. There's stuff that is indefensible. And quite frankly, if I spent all of my time talking about the presidential race, we spent all of our time talking about the presidential race, there would be no time to talk about anything else. You know, as far as on balance, Trump versus Clinton, I support Trump. If you ask me about individual issues as it relates to the past with both of them, unfortunately, that alone could be its own meeting. We spent the last question talking about how many ways we could talk about education, the future of education. It would be way too much of a distraction if I, as a candidate, or a congressman, or someone running for any level of office right now, chose to make this campaign about the presidential race. It would be entirely irresponsible. And quite frankly, none of you would get answers to all the questions that you care about the most. Thanks for asking.
When Obama took office, he ran on shovel-ready jobs, which you're now involved in the state. What happened when he was in control of Congress for the first 2 years? I never seen that happen in the first 2 of that Congress. He was a Democratic Congress. He pushed the shovel-ready jobs, which the infrastructure of this country is that's the wheels of the economy. What happened? Why didn't it happen?
Can you repeat the question that you're asking, because we can't hear it in the back?
The request is for you to repeat the question.
Mike,
Okay, are you asking about then, or are you asking about now?
then, why it didn't pass when he had control and he ran on that? Because I still
Well, I
don't
mean,
see it happening.
they did pass a stimulus package back then. A lot of that money, I mean, some of that money got spent here in New York State, some of that money got spent on Long Island. We see it in some places. We see some of the stimulus money in the 1st Congressional District. There was a project in Hauppauge, 347, that was upgraded. I live, as I mentioned, I live just a few miles from here, and they have the new headquarters for Fish and Wildlife and the Wertheim National Wildlife Refuge. That was actually a pretty expensive project. It might be too nice of a building that they built there, quite honestly, as far as being good stewards of tax dollars, but it's a really nice building. So they did get it through. More recently, as I mentioned earlier, is that Congress last December passed, for the first time in over a decade, a long-term highway bill. 5-year fully funded highway bill. Again, this was a product of both sides, Republicans, Democrats, liberals, conservatives, Congress, and the president working together, because we all want to, I mean, we all pay into the Highway Trust Fund. Our money is going into an account, and we want to see that money spent wisely, and it is with the short-term patches. But what's unfortunate about doing a whole bunch of short-term patches is that if you are a state or a local planner, and you want to figure out whether or not you're going to be able to, in the fiscal year 2017, 2018, be able to do a $26 million revitalization of Hospital Road Bridge, if you're doing short-term patches of months at a time, you're never able to plan for the future. So that's why it's important. I mean, now we have a policy in place for 5 years. That's the way it should get done. And I don't care who's in charge. This shouldn't be a Republican issue or Democratic issue. It shouldn't be a partisan issue. We're paying money when we go to the gas, to fill up our gas tank. One thing that's interesting, that's worth noting, by the way, in the 1st Congressional District, like Brookhaven Town alone, we have 2,100 miles of roads. In the 1st Congressional District, we have 21 miles of federal interstate. So just think of all that money that we send to Washington. That's why it was important as part of the highway bill that we got the Safe Bridges Act passed. Up until 2012, we would get $250 million a year for our state and local bridges. MAP 21, 2012 reversed that formula, so we went from $250 million to zero. So what we had to do at the end of 2015 was get this language added to the highway bill, which now reverses the formula back, and now we get $250 million again. You have to use, by the way, it doesn't matter what party you are. You work with all of your colleagues in the region, Senate and House. You try to team up to get this stuff done. For me, it was working with someone else who's on the Transportation Infrastructure Committee. I was a majority member, he was a minority member, Sean Patrick Maloney from Hudson Valley. And he worked on his side, I worked on mine. And we got the chairman to support and got it in the bill. But that really should be the way this stuff gets done long term. We shouldn't be dealing with short term patches ever.
Any other questions from anyone?
One back here.
Good evening, Congressman Zeldin. John Vaughn, I come from Mastic Beach. One of the things before I ask my question, I would like to thank you for your participation in getting that money for a hospital road. Unfortunately, for about 6 or 8 months, having some family members and failing health, I spent more trips going over that bridge back and forth, and my wife and I would say, when the hell are they going to do something about this bridge? And I can appreciate that when that project is going to be completed, it will solve a lot of problems, because I know how horrendous it was for us to cross, no less thinking about an ambulance trying to get across that bridge with someone maybe needing another second or two to be able to sustain their life to get to the hospital. So I want to thank you for your participation in getting that federal money. Some of your opening remarks kind of led me down a path of different questions I wanted to ask you, and I definitely am not going to ask the question I originally walked through the door with. And one of the things you said about keeping America safe. And I think about how we need to keep America safe. And although we have between 9 and 12 and 13 million illegal aliens in this country, we can address that problem at another date. What we need to do, I feel, is we have to secure the borders, because we have to be able to stop those who are either illegal aliens that are not going to bring this country any benefit, or possibly being able to bring people from the Middle East through that same door and then have to deal with them. I know what in this country, in Chicago, what they're dealing with on a daily basis. And now you think, well, Chicago is a long ways from here. But you know what? Brentwood is a lot closer. And when I hear about MS-13 and what they're doing in Brentwood, we're not that far away. So it scares me to have my children, grandchildren, and now great-grandchild have to be brought up in possibly an environment that they have there. I feel that those borders have to be sealed, and then we can vet the people who are here.
Yep.
Well, first off, to the first part of the question, because Brookhaven Hospital happens to be the hospital that we go to. I actually ended up spending a few hours there last night. My wife, who is doing okay now, found herself as car 3 of a 5-car pileup. Her car is not doing as well as she's doing. Fortunately, she's a little sore, but she's okay. So I actually, I spent a few hours going, I went over that bridge last night going to the hospital and speaking to some of their staff, and they're looking to widen that bridge, because whenever they do shift changes, that bridge automatically clogs up every single time. So widening that bridge is important. So I just got a good, healthy earful last night, but it's something I was aware of already. Securing our borders is very important. I believe that a nation that doesn't have borders isn't a nation at all. And we have many opportunities to strengthen our borders. Right now, Mike McCall, who's the chairman of the House Homeland Security Committee, Bob Goodlatte is the chairman of the House Judiciary Committee. The House Homeland Security Committee is working on a border security bill. The Judiciary Committee is working on an interior enforcement bill. Because you could put another Border Patrol agent on the border, but if they don't have the tools to be able to actually enforce the laws and to stop the illegal entry and to do something about it, then you can put 1,000 more. You have to also change some of the interior enforcement rules as well. There's a lot more that we could be doing at our borders. And for those who are very focused on solving all the immigration challenges in one particular bill, over the course of the last decade, we've had a Republican president and a Democratic president. We've had a Republican Congress, a Democratic Congress, and both, and we've had every mixture of that. I think the last decade, every single combination. And through every 2 years, everyone's been focused on immigration, as they should. This is a really important issue. And there's just been so much politics and so like, okay, how are we going to get 700 things done in one piece of legislation? You can't get the votes to get it passed. But the thing that's unfortunate is that with border security, I have found that there's a lot of bipartisan support for strengthening our borders. So why don't we pass some of these bills and make progress? That's what, again, not a Republican thing or a Democratic thing. I'm not here to, I'm actually blaming both parties. But I would say that what's really important is instead of, for those who are trying to, because we could get a few more votes if we get a few people behind in the strategy, instead of trying to get everything done in one bill, if we can get a little bit more support for the border security bill, in the Senate, we think a majority of 100 is 51, right? It's actually 60 in the Senate because of filibuster. By the way, ask the average person in our district, what's filibuster, cloture, or reconciliation? Somewhere in that question, there are some people, if you ask that question to, they might actually fall asleep while you're asking the question. You're getting really into the weeds. But some of these proposals, it requires 60 votes in order to get some of this stuff passed. So yes, there's a Republican majority in the Senate, and there's been a Republican majority in the Senate, Democratic majority in the Senate before that. But you need 60 votes, which means in the Senate, unless you use reconciliation, that's 51 votes. Then you need 60 to invoke cloture and debate and bring a bill up for a vote. So we have votes in the House right now. The way the House is structured right now, we can pass border security, interior enforcement with Republican, Democratic support. We're in good shape. But in the Senate, we're a few votes shy. And obviously it depends on the next president and what they want to do through signing a piece of paper. Because I believe that a lot of what gets signed on paper, and by the way, every president, I can name different executive orders signed by Republican and Democratic presidents that should be done through legislation, going through Congress, working with people. By the way, sometimes something doesn't get done that should because of partisan fighting, and that's bad, that's wrong. We should be frustrated about that. Sometimes something doesn't get done because of partisan fighting, and it shouldn't because it's a bad idea. And when something does get done, the media doesn't seem to have any room in their 1 hour to talk about anything good that happens ever. Right now, if we left here, we put on TV, doesn't matter what station you pick, they'll probably spend the entire hour talking about something really, really controversial with the presidential race. And if they found any time to talk about something else, it's probably something bad that happened. Maybe there was, some explosion that went off in Asia, Europe. There'll be room maybe to talk about that for a few minutes. But if they ever have room to talk about anything to do with Congress, they'll only talk about what you're fighting over. And it's unfortunate when people believe that every level of government, that like no one's representing them. This particular Congress has passed more bills out of committee than the 113th Congress and the 25-year average. This current Congress has passed more bills in the House floor than the 113th Congress and the 25-year average. We've passed more bills that have been signed by the President, Republican Congress, Democratic President, over 219 bills passed and signed into law, more than the 113th Congress and the 25-year average. So it's not that nothing's getting done. What's unfortunate is a combination of people becoming so frustrated because when you turn on the news, all you're being told about is stuff to stir your emotions, to get us fired up and upset and emotional. And really what we should be stirring up is positive energy to actually solve all of these challenges because there's a lot more agreement than we all give ourselves credit for. In this room and in Congress, there's a lot more to find agreement on. It's your show, you're the vice president.
One of the things that troubles me and other people I know are these so-called sanctuary cities, where illegal aliens who have committed crimes being released from local jail, and the municipality specifically does not permit the police to contact ICE, that's right, ICE. And what, is there anything in the federal government, the Congress right now, that's going to put pressure on these cities to require them to notify federal authorities for criminals, not to matter just illegal aliens, so like criminals? It's troublesome. A woman was killed in San Francisco because San Francisco would not cooperate with the federal government. And the fellow went out, got a gun, didn't need a background check, he was a criminal, an illegal alien, and murdered a woman. I mean, what's going on that issue?
So you have different levels of government where you might have a mayor, you might have someone who's in charge of a county or a town or a village or a city, a state, where you have policies at all these different levels where they are creating sanctuary cities within their own jurisdiction. And they, whether it's law enforcement, whether it's as a matter of procedure or it's actual laws that are being written to tolerate it. There is a growing frustration throughout our entire country and a growing frustration in Congress when because there are examples of the immigrant story that are awful. Like, let me give you, like when you have, there are some great examples too. But not every immigrant story is made up of that person who came here. When you talk about the people who are not here legally, not every one of them came here when they were 2 years old and they were educated here and they love our country and they don't know anything other than the United States of America. They have passion and patriotism and they want to participate, pay taxes, and they wear the flag on their face and they have all what we want of every American who's here and loving our country. There's the other side of things. Where you have someone who commits a murder, a rape, they steal, maybe using, in a setting, it's like a violent felony where someone gets hurt. They get deported and then they come back. Maybe they get deported again and they come back. And then when they come back again, then they murder someone. You bring up the San Francisco example. So, that's one story of those worst cases. I would say this isn't just this isn't just a federal issue. This isn't just a local issue or a state issue. What we're seeing all across the entire country is that different jurisdictions, the people are getting elected and they're coming into power either as executives or legislatively, where they are enacting policies that are furthering it. You can make some progress where you see funding go somewhere to a place that is a sanctuary city using the power of the purse. In order to better utilize the power of the purse and figure out how to word this without, I don't want to go on a deep tangent this late at night for sake of all of you. But the way that the budget process, the appropriations process, you hear the word regular order. At the beginning of the year, you agree on an amount, House and Senate, and you pass 12 appropriations bills. And then you have to pass them all by the end of September. In 2015 and 2016, the House almost completed the entire process. 2015, the Senate didn't pass a single appropriations bill. And what happens is, the media and the American public, we don't really start talking about it until it's like 6 p.m. on the day the government's about to run out of funding. Like the government's running out of funding tonight at midnight, and it's all so-and-so's fault. And the so-and-so really, you are forgetting several months of the backstory of how we got to this particular point. And you start talking about the government's going to shut down. And now it's becoming deeply partisan, deeply political. And I would say one of the best ways for Congress to more effectively utilize the power of the purse is for the American public to be more engaged in the appropriations process throughout, as opposed to not really getting involved until the end, when it's 6 p.m. the day the government's going to run out of funding, and you start to get involved then. Because if you want the executive branch to be accountable to the legislative branch, if you want to enact better policies with regards to these appropriations bills that pass, if you don't want to see omnibuses, you want to see minibuses at worst, but see appropriations pass and the president sign, that process is one that actually goes on right now, all year. 2015-16, we almost completed the entire process, but the Senate isn't passing their appropriations bills. And most of the American public isn't even aware of the backstory. But to your point, if you want to go the defunding route, your most effective power is the power of the purse, utilizing regular order in the appropriations process. That's the answer. That's where you have the most amount of power.
Anyone trying to do that?
Yeah, in the House, you can actually, in the House, we pass these appropriations bills. But the problem is in the Senate, because they won't, right now you have 54 Republicans and you need 60 votes. Now, I believe that they should use reconciliation in the Senate for appropriations bills, which means that the Senate would be able to pass appropriations bills with 51 votes and then you wouldn't need 60. They've had this rule for decades. And because of this rule, by when Republicans are in charge, Democrats in charge, because of this rule in the Senate, when it gets abused, you end up completely shutting down the appropriations process, and the American public loses their voice because you're seeing stuff get done with CRs and omnibuses, which is not the way to do it.
Folks, with respect to time, we have gone over a little bit, and we do have another guest that we want to hear from tonight. Mr. Anthony Holst is here. Unfortunately, because we've gone a little over, it is going to start to get late. I just want to thank Congressman Zeldin for coming. Really appreciate it.
Ms. Holmes?
Yeah, right. That will go nowhere, and have to return it to the... Good luck.